Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the March webinar for the Transforming Assessment series. Today we're going to be looking at enhancing student learning outcomes with simulation-based pedagogies. And Pierre Benckendorff from the University of Queensland, this is our business school at the University of Queensland, will be speaking about simulations. So, Pierre, would you like to begin, please?
Thanks, Matthew. I've been working with a team of other people from 5 other universities on a OLT project, which was funded as a strategic priority or commissioned project. And we're getting to the end of that project now, but as the title suggests, it's all about using online simulations in business. And I should just highlight right at the outset that this project wasn't about creating a simulation. There are plenty of commercial packages in the marketplace that try to simulate businesses at various levels of complexity, but these simulations are all about trying to get students to try their hand at running a business, often in a competitive environment. So our project is really more about the pedagogy and assessment that sits around those simulations that people might use, and it was about trying to create a set of resources that educators can access more easily, because when you first make a decision to adopt a simulation, it can be quite a daunting experience. So what I thought I would do today is just to reflect at the start on some of the challenges that we face, that I think we face in business education, particularly for those of you who are not from a business background. I'll spend a little bit of time just highlighting a couple of the simulations that we have got in business, just so that everybody understands what we're talking about. I'll give you a bit of an overview of the project we've been working on and the resources that we are producing, in case they are useful to you or people that you work with. But more importantly, I want to finish by talking about how people are using assessments around those simulations and how they structured the pedagogy. I'll probably focus more on the assessment towards the end. So one of the reasons we started this project was that we have a number of challenges in business education. Business is traditionally quite a technical degree, and most universities, business schools are some of the largest schools, if not the largest schools in terms of student numbers. And so those large cohorts create a number of challenges for us when we're trying to teach what are essentially professional or technical degrees with quite clearly specified or defined capabilities or competencies that students should have. Makes it quite difficult for us to put students into work integrated learning. Some universities certainly do have compulsory work integrated learning components within their business degrees, but that can be quite difficult to achieve with very large numbers of students. And there is a great deal of variability in terms of the experiences that students have and the skills that they are able to develop through work integrated learning. Reports and essays are frequently used as assessment tasks for business students. To some extent, reports might be used to simulate the kinds of reports that students might do in the real world, so they can be made to be very authentic. Essays perhaps less so. Essays are good critical thinking pieces, but not necessarily good authentic learning pieces. And so a lot of reports and essays that are used tend to be quite limited in terms of developing business capability. And by business capability, I really mean a whole suite of skills, competencies, abilities, and application of knowledge around the management or the marketing of a business. Business plans, case studies are also a commonly used style of assessment in business schools. Case studies are at least a bit more authentic than some other styles of assessment, but they're not necessarily dynamic. So the usual case study approach involves students looking at a case and then coming into the classroom to problem solve that case or discuss that case in in a classroom environment, and often to produce solutions to problems or recommendations to problems. But there's rarely an opportunity for students to then see how those recommendations play out. So they are not all that interactive or dynamic or responsive. Business plans, similarly, it's not unusual for students to be asked to develop a marketing plan or a strategic plan for a business or a proposal for a business, but you never have the opportunity to actually implement that plan to see how successful those plans are. MOOCs, of course, are becoming more common in business. Exams have been used for a long time. I spent some time last year doing a couple of MOOCs through Open Universities Australia, and although I felt that I developed a lot of knowledge as a result of those MOOCs, I didn't feel that they did very much for my skills, and I think that would be a fair comment for a lot of exams as well. They're good at testing knowledge, but not particularly good at developing skills or a broader range of capabilities. So some of these traditional types of assessments have a place, and we're not suggesting they don't have a place, but we're really looking for something that we can use with large cohorts that allow us to develop these management capabilities or sharpen the managerial skills that students develop. And we're looking for systems where students can do that through a process of continuous feedback. And so we started to put together this team on online business simulations, and the team is made up of a bunch of people at different institutions who have been using simulations for a number of years. So we're quite passionate about simulations. We are all members of what Guy Lohmann, who's at Griffith University, likes to call the Church of Business Simulations, and we like to convert people into our church. But just to be clear about the simulations I'm talking about here, typically they are quite complex. The days of getting a sim on a 3.5-inch floppy disk and sticking it in the computer and the disk failing halfway through the semester and being able to hack the code to work out what makes a simulation tick, I think are behind us. The simulations that are in the marketplace have come a long way, particularly in the last 5 years, and a lot of them, as the title of this presentation suggests, have gone online. So they are essentially accessible anywhere that you have an internet connection, so students are not tied to computer labs. So they tend to be quite complex. They're usually designed to teach strategy, competitive analysis, finance, marketing, HR, cross-functional alignment between all of those sections, and also the use of tactics or the selection of tactics to build a successful business. They cover a whole range of industry sectors. So one of the first things we did as part of the project was to conduct a desktop audit of all of the commercial packages we could find that were targeted at the tertiary education market, because it's important to point out that a number of these are games that are aimed at the leisure market. Some of them are aimed at the primary and secondary education market, and then others are more sophisticated university level packages. A couple of examples you see on the screen there. One that I use here at UQ is called Airline Online. It requires students to basically set up their own airline, run their own airline, set up all their routes, and compete with other teams of students for market share. GoVenture is another one. CapSim is probably the best known generic simulation in the marketplace. There are others in hospitality, mobile phones, bikes, coffee shops, cafes. There's a whole range of different industry sectors that these simulations can run in. This happens to be a screenshot of capstones. You'd see most of these sims are not necessarily all that pretty. There are some that are 3D virtual learning environments, but most of the ones that we are dealing with that seem to be used in business are heavily data-driven, menu-driven systems that essentially require students to enact a series of decisions to then look at information, various reports, similar to the reports that a business would typically generate, and then to make decisions about their business based on those reports. This one is from a simulation called MarkStrat, which is a marketing-based simulation. This one is from a simulation called HOTS, which is a hotel company. This is Airline Online, and you can see in this screenshot, if you have it coming through on your screen, that there are decisions about staffing, there are advertising decisions. In this case, because it's an airline, there are scheduling decisions as well, and airport decisions and so on. So there are differences, but there are also a lot of similarities in terms of what they do. I just want to pull back a bit from that very specific definition and example that I provided to talk a bit about simulations in general. And we've put together this little hierarchy as a way of trying to explain to people the different types of simulations, and it's certainly not comprehensive or exhaustive. There are lots of other typologies of simulations around, but in a business sense, some people run physical simulations in the classroom, such as scenarios, role plays, or problem-based learning exercises. We're not particularly interested in those in this project. We're interested in the virtual simulations. Some of them are still software-based simulations that need to be installed in labs. We're not particularly interested in those, mainly because we don't see much of a future for them. The ones we are interested in are online simulations. We haven't gone a great deal into the 3D virtual learning environments because there are not very many of them, and they tend to develop a different set of skills to the data-centered simulations I'm going to talk about. So we are generally interested in the data-centered ones at the bottom of that screen. I really like the work that Jan Harrington at Murdoch University has done on authentic learning and e-learning in digital spaces. And some of you will have seen this matrix a bit before, which I've just tweaked a little bit, but she does like to talk about learning and assessment happening in academic settings versus real settings, and those tasks being decontextualized or authentic. And when you arrange different examples of assessment and learning tasks that we might give students, the simulations fit very much in that bottom quadrant, the yellow square, in the same sort of areas, scenarios and problem-based learning. So I find that a useful model just to kind of situate what we're talking about. This is the learning pyramid. It's not a model that I've seen much empirical support for, but I find it useful to just explain to people why we think simulations are an interesting way for students to learn. It's a very simple model that talks about passive teaching methods, and that they are not necessarily very effective for helping students retain knowledge and skills, but as you move down that pyramid towards more interactive and participatory teaching methods, simulations fit very much into that 75% practice by doing category, and some of the work we've been doing on the project very much suggests that the students do retain a lot of what they're learning in the simulation because they're actually doing it. And Tim said, pretty sure I saw this model being thoroughly myth-busted recently, and that I think I may have seen the same thing, which is why I made the comment that I'm not sure I've seen it empirically tested anywhere. Just a couple of points about simulation-based learning. Simulations more broadly are used in a whole range of training and education settings. They're used in many different disciplines. Those of you from the medical and health, the nursing areas will be very familiar with simulations because they seem to be used quite often in those disciplines. They are used less often in areas like business. But a key point to make is that it is a technique, not a technology. So we see it very much as a teaching and learning tool, as a way of helping students experience something that's real in a virtual environment where they can make errors that don't have any real repercussions, and they are great for collaborative learning as well. So you might wonder about that, because you might be thinking at this point that students are sitting in front of the computer playing a game or a simulation, and the interaction is between the student and the sim. But most of the business simulations require students to work in teams on a business, and the collaborative learning comes from working together in those teams. Oh, that's great, Matt. Our IT stuff was going really well. Guess what's happened? My mouse has run out of batteries.
Okay, do you want to press the next slide?
Click through for me, that would be great.
Okay.
Something's
all right, just let me know when you want to click the next slide and I'll be happy to do that.
Yeah, thanks. Why business simulations specifically? They are particularly good at integrating various elements of running a business. So even small businesses are quite complex to run, because they require the business owner to integrate a knowledge of marketing, finance, accounting, economics and supply and demand variables, human resources and people skills and people management. And that's something that can be quite difficult to get a student, and particularly an undergraduate student, to understand. So we find them particularly useful for helping students understand the relationships between all of those areas. And certainly the simulation, if one part of the business fails, if the HR part of it or the marketing part's not done properly, they can then see the impact on the rest of their business. So they learn very quickly how those elements are integrated. They are active learning environments, so they often mirror real-world problems. Some of them actually have real-world data sitting in the background. So the airline simulation is based on real-world passenger traffic data, and a lot of the others have real-world data in the background as well. They are typically used in large capstone courses because they do pull information together and allow students to integrate information, and they can be scaled. Like any kind of scaling, you do need enough staff to actually still support the learning experience, to make sure students understand the technology and so on. But I would say they are more scalable than some other approaches that I've seen. Authentic and dynamic team-based learning experiences I've covered off already. Employability skills, hopefully that is pretty obvious. So I'll get you to move on, Matt. The critical thinking and decision making in a non-linear environment is a really important point. Some of the early simulations were quite linear, and once you'd kind of worked out the linear relationships between variables, you were able to game the system. The newer, more complex simulations are not really linear, they're quite dynamic. So the activities of other businesses and teams operating in the virtual space that you're in can sometimes produce unexpected results, which students then have to respond to. And that's good, because that's what happens in the real world as well. Sometimes decisions and actions can lead to quite complex and unexpected outcomes. I won't cover off all the points because I think some of those are quite obvious. The last one I've commented on already, that they are available anytime, anywhere that you can get an internet connection. Most of them work well, equally well on Macs and PCs, on tablets, and some of them work reasonably well on mobile phones as well. So some of my students will sit on the bus on their way into university and play with their sim in the morning. So next slide. We spent a bit of time as part of the project running focus groups with students to try and understand what they were getting out of it and what they liked. We've also run a whole series of surveys, which I'll talk about later. But But students often talk about how it feels real, that they like the ability to make mistakes and to see the consequences of those mistakes, that it feels really practical. It feels like their decisions make something happen, but also there are often comments around the collaborative aspect of working in a team and having to make decisions about the business, often in a context where it's not clear that there is a right decision, that there are several different paths the team can take, the business can take, and the students have to debate that and work through that. So next slide. Work closely together. I've commented on the teamwork part already. Problem-solving skills, making decisions. Those seem to be really the key strengths of these styles of simulations. There are a smaller number of sims in business that are focused on developing people skills or soft skills around ethical decision making. And if I had to say there was a gap in business education, it would be in that area. The simulations in that area are not particularly sophisticated, and they're not particularly sophisticated around sustainability issues and corporate social responsibility and those sorts of things. So there are some weaknesses we've identified, but they certainly are very good at getting students to look at data, debate what to do next, and often solve problems that are thrown up. So next slide. I just want to talk very quickly about a project to give you a bit of an overview of what that does. The website for the project, the link was posted right at the start of the chat session, so if you go back through the log, you're more than welcome to check out the website, but it's pretty easy. It's just biz with a Z, bizsims.edu.au. And what we wanted to do with this project, firstly, was to map the features of online simulations, and that's why we did the audit. There's about 30 commercial packages that we're aware of that are targeted at the tertiary education market. Because they're commercial packages, obviously, there is a cost associated with running most of these with your students, not unlike the costs that would be associated with using software, so licensing costs. So that was the first aim, was to look at some of their features. The second aim was to look at the pedagogies and the learning outcomes. The third one was to look at some innovative ways of using simulations and to share some of the resources that people were using with simulations. And we've done that by creating a series of case studies that I'll talk about in a moment. Lastly, we wanted to have a look at some of the challenges of running simulations and integrating them into sustainable teaching practice. So if we go to the next slide, Matt, I'll just quickly introduce the project team. We've got a couple of people from Griffith, and Marlene is on the session today, and I notice she just posted the link there. But we also have Guy Lohman, who works in the aviation management area at Griffith. Paul Strickland is at La Trobe University. Paul Whitelaw, I should change that actually, he was at Victoria, but he's now at William Angus. And Paul Reynolds is at the University of South Australia. Lainey, who's our trustee project manager, and I think I did see her name some way there as well in the session. So next slide. That's just putting faces to the names. So what we've managed to do is create a whole series of resources. The simulations audit, the resource that's come out of that is an A to Z listing of simulations in business that are aimed at the tertiary market. It's the only A to Z index I'm aware of. When I first started using these a number of years ago, I looked desperately for a resource like this on the internet, and there was nothing that I could find. Unfortunately, I had to wade my way through academic articles and Google search results, and trying to work out what the best sim was for me to use was quite a daunting task. So we like to think that listing will be helpful for people. We are at the moment developing some more detailed profiles on some of those simulations that will provide information about their features and so on. The simulation learning barometer, I've just got some batteries so I can actually control this now. So I'm right with the slides again, Matthew. The simulation learning barometer was a tool that we've developed, and that is it's essentially a survey, but we wanted to develop it as a tool that people could roll out, a generic tool people could roll out if they were using simulations with their students, as a way of measuring what the learning outcomes were for their particular cohort. So that barometer covers a number of the different levels in Bloom's taxonomy to try and measure what students are learning from the sim. It covers off teamwork, learning aspects, self-efficacy, and a range of other variables that literature suggests are important to look at. That learning barometer is on our website. It can be downloaded in various formats and adjusted and played with. When the project is finished in the middle of the year, we will have some benchmark data on the website as well, so that you'll be able to compare the results for your cohort with other cohorts. The case studies I'll talk about in a moment. That's another resource we've developed, and that is perhaps the most useful resource to come out of the project. We're working on a good practice guide, similar to a lot of other OLT projects. That will be ready towards the middle of the year. The website I've mentioned before. The national workshops are all over, unfortunately, apart from the Adelaide workshop, which we're running at the end of this month, the 26th of March. If anybody here is from Adelaide and would like to join us, we've got some details on our website about the Adelaide workshop. The other workshops were run at the end of last year. So the case studies we've tried to make quite interactive. We thought for them to be useful to people, they needed to provide resources and shortcuts that will enhance the process of embedding a simulation. So for each case study, we've tried to provide a video of the educator talking about how they use the case study, as well as any resources people were prepared to share with us. And typically they are course outlines or syllabi, marking rubrics, examples of assessment tasks that people have set, and so on. And so that's been a really nice aspect to this project, is sharing those resources. Now, I'm just interested to hear from you. I've been talking for about half an hour. I wonder if you can use the chat area just for a minute, and if you could tell me if you use any simulations at your institution. If you do, why? If you don't, why not? And while you're typing, Bernie asks, will there be a demo of some simulations? The short answer to that is no, not on this session, because the demos actually take quite a lot of time. So we have done demos at our workshops. And the demos usually run for about 2 or 3 hours, just to give you an idea of how intricate they are. All right. Okay, so I see a couple of responses coming through with people using various sims, some people thinking about it. Certainly, we've noticed that I would say probably less than half of the business schools in Australia are using simulations at the moment, but we've noticed a big increase in interest in using them. And I think that's because some of the other teaching and learning techniques available to us to develop some of the same skills as simulations are becoming increasingly problematic because of the bureaucratic environment that we operate in, and that might be why we're seeing this upswing, or it may be that they're just becoming more sophisticated. Some tips for using simulation pedagogies. These are really a collection of tips that we will formalise and write up in our learning guide, in our good practice guide when we finish that. But I want to give you a bit of a preview of these today in this session, and they come out of the case studies that we've got on our website. We also did interview a number of educators. We've got a collection of about 19 interviews, and there's a remarkable consistency in terms of the way people are using simulations across different disciplines in business, and I wanted to share some of those points with you. So this is an obvious point, the first one, but perhaps it's not, because people don't always do this. It's really important at the start to map out your expectations with students, as it is with any kind of teaching and learning process, but particularly with simulations, because the students often haven't experienced a simulation before. They don't know necessarily what to expect, or if they do have some expectations, those expectations might be quite unrealistic. So it's really important to talk to students about the amount of time that they might spend in the sim. Time is a really big problem, and it's a problem that seems quite common irrespective of which sim you run. And it's a problem because students spend too much time in the simulation, and you might not think that's a problem, but it becomes a problem when other lecturers start knocking on your door saying, my students are spending too much time on your assessment and therefore are not doing well enough in my class. So it's something to keep in mind. Because of the gaming aspect of simulations, students can get wrapped up in it and can get perhaps too engaged, and they do invest too much time. Because most of them require students to set up a business and to run that business as a small team, typically 4 to 5 students work in a team, it's really important for students to understand that different people in the team might have different team roles. So this is not what Guy Lohman on our team calls a Frankenstein assignment, where you can carve up the assignment and farm out the different sections to different students in the team and then just pull it all together at the end. It really is an authentic team setting where everybody needs to have a role and everybody needs to pull their weight, because if one person in the team doesn't do that, usually there is some kind of failure in the business. The other important point to make here is that it's very much a teaching and learning style where you are the guide on the side, facilitating the learning experience with students. Give students time to learn from trial and error, and this is, it seems like another obvious point, but a lot of people, when they run the simulation with their students, just throw the students into it and expect them to perform pretty much as soon as they've had a training session. And we found it useful to give the students a trial in the first 2 or 3 weeks of the semester where they can mess around with the simulation, they can work out how it runs, and they can learn through trial and error before they actually start running a proper business that might have implications for their assessment. It's really important to provide support. It is a piece of technology. We can't assume because our students are on the internet every day and on social media that they will automatically take to simulations. Some of these simulations are actually not terribly user-friendly, extremely powerful, but not pretty or particularly user-friendly. And so some of the sim companies provide videos and demos and manuals that are very good. Others are really very poor in the support that they provide. So my tip, if you do decide to adopt a sim, is to really ask lots of questions from the sales reps about the kind of support that they do provide students, because they can really take a lot of heat off you if they provide some of those resources. The one I use uses a whole range of YouTube videos, and it takes students step by step through various tasks. You need to encourage collaboration as well. That doesn't necessarily happen automatically. Some students just don't get into that flow, working together as a team cohesively. It might be necessary to encourage them to use tools like Facebook. So a lot of groups will set up a Facebook page where they will discuss each week what to do in the sim. Somebody said, ask them about the underlying business and cultural models in which the sim is built. That is very important in business. Capson very US-centric. Yeah, absolutely, and that's certainly very true. So there's some of the sims have got a really heavy focus on profitability and big corporate America. Others are very much focused on small business, but there are certainly cultural values embedded in some of these that you need to be aware of. if you have a really diverse student cohort. Aligning learning outcomes, that's just simple constructive alignment, so I won't labour that point. Using complementary pedagogies, what works really well is not just to run the sim as the only innovative thing you do in your course, but to complement that experience with students. So if your sim is on mobile phones, why not take them out to a mobile phone retailer? Or why not get somebody from the telecommunications industry to come in to speak to them in class? Why not use it with a case study of a real-world company? People who are doing that have reported that that works really, really well with the students. I find it useful to link the curriculum to events in the simulation, and by that I mean that you need to set aside class time for debriefs. You can't run the simulation separate to whatever you do in class time. It has to be really integrated with what's happening in the classroom. So although my students often work outside of the classroom, in their own time, from home or from campus on the sim, we are in a class where we do have access to computers in a collaborative learning space, where we can switch it on and we can run through things and we can debrief what's happened in the simulation, and that's a really important part of the learning experience. Another important point is to assess learning and not necessarily the time or effort spent in the simulation. And this is a bit of a controversial point in the simulations literature, certainly in business. I'm not sure about other areas, but some people will attach a lot of marks to how well a student's business or company performs. So the students who have really successful companies get really good marks. There is a counter view to that, you don't give any marks for how well students perform in the simulation, that all of the marks are attached to other assessments that sit around the sim, and I'll talk about some of those assessments in a minute. I think there are pros and cons to both approaches. There is a middle ground where you might give a small percentage of the weighting to the actual performance metrics in the simulation. Wollongong have really designed their own simulation, and we've got a case study on our website about the sim that they've designed, because they do a number of really interesting things there, and they have a strong corporate social responsibility focus through their degree, and the sim is used in the capstone, and so it has a strong corporate social responsibility emphasis as well. And in that sim, Belinda, who's the educator that uses the simulation, gets students to pick the performance metrics they want to be evaluated on at the end of the semester. So they can be evaluated based on their social sustainability or their environmental sustainability or their profitability if their end game is to be a really large, profitable multinational corporation. And I think that's an interesting approach. And I'm coming back to Jan Harrington's work because simulations are a really good authentic learning and assessment tool. So Jan talks about authentic online learning environments involving an authentic context. So what we're trying to do with the simulation is to try and create an authentic context. Although it's a virtual context, we're trying to make it as real as possible for the students. But there's still that safety net for them to make mistakes. The tasks have to be authentic tasks and activities. They have to be tasks that you would actually do when you run a business. They have to be decisions and problems that you might solve when you're running a small business. And this is the real problem we have with work integrated learning. I'm a big fan of work integrated learning and the work that organisations like ACEN do, but a lot of our students in business and management don't end up actually getting to practice management skills or problem solving skills. The skills are much lower order skills. Simulations, I think, are good at developing some of those higher order management skills. Expert performances, I think this is where it can be really effective, as I said before, to bring in industry lecturers and guest lecturers to come and talk to the students, to link what's happening in the simulation to the real world, to make that really explicit. Multiple roles and perspectives. I think simulations do that because of the dynamic environment that they're in. And they do that automatically. They allow students to think about problems and issues from different perspectives and roles. Collaborative construction of knowledge. I think that point's pretty obvious if you follow the presentation so far. Reflection, I'll come back to that because there are things you can do around assessment to actually encourage that reflection. Articulation and presentation, again, things you can do through assessment to get students to articulate what's happening in the simulation, to share what's happening, to talk about the results, and to present what they're doing around their business. Coaching and scaffolding, I've spoken about the need for support and resources to scaffold that learning experience. Authentic assessment I'll talk about on the next slide. So I hope you've got at least a rough idea of what these sims are and what they can do. I wonder if I had to ask you to design an authentic assessment task to go with an online simulation, I wonder what you would come up with. So I wonder if you could type in the chat box for me just a quick brainstorm ideas of what you would do if you had a class of students running a sim. How would you assess them? And I'm just reading through the comments while you type those. Mark asks, can you clarify the best way for students undertaking a blue sim to individually demonstrate their learning achievement? I will come back to that. Mark's gone, but I'll come back to that point. There's a lot of conversation there about cultural bias, which are very valid points. Yeah, some good comments there from Geoff. Fellow students in my master's class complained they were forced to pay. It became an issue. We're actually not allowed to charge students at UQ for something that is a compulsory part of their assessment. So the school picks up the bill here, but of course that is an issue. Let's have a look at your answers around assessment. Assessing individual skills and specific problem solving. What do you most want to know about what the students think they have learned? Chemistry and biochemistry, so safety, accuracy of calculations, and how does the simulated task relate to theory? Okay, well, let me have a look at I'll tell you a bit about what we found with the project that we've done. And the assessments are actually not mind-blowingly innovative. But they have been carefully designed to fit with the simulation. So the assessments are actually quite, in business at least, are often quite traditional assessment tasks. So often one of the things that we're trying to assess in a simulation is that team interaction and that collaboration to see whether that is working effectively. And the traditional approaches around peer evaluation with all the pros and cons that come along with that method certainly is used to do that. An innovative approach that's used at the University of Sydney about halfway through the semester is to get each team together and to actually throw a scenario that's related to the simulation at them. So they'll sit the students down in a classroom to say, right, this is where your company is now. This has just happened, and so they will introduce a new scenario, almost like a case study, and they will then ask the students to discuss how they would react to that scenario. So the assessment is then based on an observation of how well the group does that and how well the group interacts with each other, or it can be videoed, and the videos can be marked. And I thought that was quite an interesting way of trying to assess that team interaction. Some people use wikis, so they ask students to use a wiki space week to week to interact with each other, or a Facebook page or some other online platform to interact with each other, and that can become the basis for trying to assess the teamwork aspects. Reports and presentations are used quite commonly, and there are a couple of different formats. It's not unusual at the start of the semester to ask each group of students to come up with a proposal or a plan for their business. So that's not different to what they would do in any other course. But then, of course, in a simulation course, they get to introduce that plan to see how it actually plays out. So that's a fairly common piece of work, a business plan or a marketing plan or a budget of some sort. Company performance, the examples that you see on the slide are actually shots, screen grabs of annual reports that my students have produced in my class, and you can see they look quite professional and glossy, so they really get into this. And what I ask the students to do is to look at annual reports of Qantas and Singapore Airlines and other airlines, and then to have a go at writing an annual report for their own airline based on the performance of their company in the simulation. So that's a really authentic task that replicates what they might do in the real world if they're working for a company. A competitor analysis is just another style. You might get students to pick another company in the class, another business that they're competing against, and to conduct a competitor analysis. And there's a whole set of skills that come along with doing a competitor analysis when you unpack that. Reflective assessments are also quite common, surprisingly. So the most common way of doing that is to ask students to maintain a blog, which is marked weekly or fortnightly or every 3 or 4 weeks, depending on how many resources you've got, or alternatively asking them to submit a reflective written piece at the end of the semester. So that's probably the most common type of individual assessment. So Mark's question was about how to assess individual learning. The reflective piece is very common. The reports and presentations tend to be done as teamwork, but not always. Some educators do ask their students, even though the students are working in a team, to individually submit a performance annual report of the company, which really requires everybody in the team to be on their toes to understand what's happening in the business. And then, of course, you've got various performance metrics that these simulations produce in the background, profitability, in some cases corporate social responsibility and sustainability measures, employee satisfaction, customer satisfaction, all of the usual sorts of metrics that you would commonly find in a business. So as I said before, there is a bit of debate about whether you should use those metrics and whether you should actually reward students just because they have a successful company, or whether you should reward students based more on the skills that they've actually demonstrated, that they've developed. Elizabeth says that she required weekly memos written to an action learning cycle format, encouraging development of reflexive skills. That's a good example. That's a great example, actually. So there are lots of interesting things that you can do, and that's what we're really interested in with this project, is what you wrap around the simulation to make it more real for students, to connect it with the real world, to connect it with the curriculum and the content that students are learning, but also to get more to the assessing the actual skills that are being developed, so assessing the outcomes rather than the process. The simulation is really the process. I do want to finish with some challenges. There are some challenges for educators. I've spoken already about the funding issue. Commercial packages do require additional funding. In some universities it's easier to make this case than others. I personally never had a problem making the case for the school to fund a sim. My sim costs about $800 a semester. Some sims have a cost per student, so the price goes up if you've got larger cohorts. But I think the safe argument to make if you are approaching people who control budgets is that simulations, and hopefully the project will demonstrate, that simulations do develop a set of skills that are otherwise difficult to develop. And so if you want your graduates to be out there to have these skills, can you really afford not to pay, which is really often quite a small fee for the sim. It is a steep initial learning curve for educators to get your head around the simulation. Some companies are very good in terms of the training they provide. for educators, others less so. But the first year I ran a sim, and I know other people have had this experience, it can be quite a daunting and stressful experience. If you drop the ball at any time in terms of the IT, the students come down on you like a ton of bricks, because it really can impact on assessment outcomes as well. So you really have to be on your toes when you run it the first time and be very clear about what you're doing and what the drivers and levers are behind the simulation. For students, a big problem is that time is compressed, and so things play out in the simulation world much more quickly than they do in the real business world. So it's important just to remind them of that, particularly when students are reflecting on the performance of their companies, that often things don't happen that quickly in the real world. Some variables are difficult to simulate, so issues around ethical decision making, interpersonal issues and interpersonal problems and conflict can be very difficult to simulate within the simulation itself. There might be things you can do with the pedagogy around the simulation to kind of generate some of that tension and need for negotiation and conflict resolution, but it's difficult to do that within the simulation. Another problem is that students become too engaged, as I've said before. It also is not a solution for all teamwork problems. So I think it's quite a good teamwork tool, but you still have teams that go nuclear and don't work out, even with simulations. So that's the end of the formal part of my presentation. I put this slide in. We are getting to the end of the project, but if you are using Sims and you're doing some interesting things, we'd love to hear from you. Do have a look at our case studies. If you reckon you're doing something really exciting that you'd like to share with the rest of the world, we'd be very keen to work with you to put together a video and a case study. So drop us an email. The details are on our website. We are also always looking for people who are willing to run the student barometer with their students as well, and we're more than happy to co-publish with people who are working in this area to share resources. So that's that we need you part. There's the website. If you go there, you'll be able to connect with us on LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, and our email is there. So that's all from me.
Okay, thank you, Pierre. That was great. Folks, just before you rush off, if you could kindly fill in our feedback survey. The link on the screen is actually clickable, but I'm going to type it in here just in case. ta.vu/feedback. So there you go. Thank you very much. I'm going to close off the recording, but if people would like to stick around, they're welcome to do so. Actually, sorry, maybe the link on the screen is not actually linked up yet, so use the one in the text chat, folks. Sorry about that. Thank you, Pierre. Interesting, and yes, folks, if you want to get in contact, please send Pierre an email, or if you can't find his email address, I'll be happy to pass the messages on. We'll also have the recording online shortly, so thank you very much, and good evening, folks.